My name is Serena Voss. I am 31 years old. The night my parents handed me a manila envelope across the kitchen table and told me I had 30 days to vacate the house I grew up in, my mother was eating a bowl of strawberry yogurt. She didn't set the spoon down. She didn't look up. She just slid the envelope toward me with 2 fingers and said, "You're 18 now. The law doesn't require us to house you anymore. We've done our part." My father, seated beside her with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, added, "We've run the numbers, Serena. You cost more than you contribute. That's just the math." That was a Tuesday evening in September. I remember the exact time because the microwave clock read 7:42 and I had been standing at the kitchen counter eating leftover pasta when my mother sat down and arranged the envelope in front of me like a place setting. 30 days notice, handwritten in my father's accountant's script on a notepad from First Harbor Bank. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I folded the envelope, put it in the back pocket of my jeans, and carried my bowl of pasta upstairs. I ate the rest of it sitting on my bedroom floor. Quietly. Alone. The way I had done most things in that house for 18 years. What they didn't know that Tuesday night was that I had already started building something. Something they would spend the next decade ignoring, dismissing, and ultimately trying to claim a piece of. This is that story. I grew up in Linden Falls, New Hampshire, in a slate-gray colonial on Birchwood Drive with black shutters and a mailbox my father repainted every spring because appearances mattered more than anything else in that house. My father, Douglas Voss, was 52 at the time of that kitchen table conversation. He was a senior partner at a mid-size accounting firm called Ashbrook & Voss. The second name was his. The first was his college roommate's, a detail my father mentioned at every dinner party as though the order of surnames was the only injustice he had ever suffered. He was precise, methodical, and deeply committed to the belief that human beings could be evaluated the way balance sheets could. Profit or liability. No middle column. My mother, Constance Voss, was 49. She had run a small interior decorating business from home for 12 years called Constance Designs, which primarily served her network of Linden Falls friends and charged rates she had not adjusted since she launched it. She was talented in the way that people who never fully commit to something often are, good enough to impress a room, not disciplined enough to build a practice. She kept a mood board above her desk in the study and spoke at length about creative vision at dinner parties while my father nodded and refilled wine glasses. Then there was my brother, Preston, who was 23 that September and had just completed a marketing degree at Dartmouth on a combination of academic scholarship and $30,000 in additional tuition support from my parents. Preston worked at a boutique advertising agency in Boston. He drove a car my parents had co-signed. He called home every Sunday, and my mother described those calls to neighbors as our weekly ritual. He had never, in his entire life, been handed an envelope with a 30-day notice inside it. That detail is not incidental. I need to tell you who I was at 18 because the version my parents believed in and the version that actually existed were 2 different people. The version they believed in was a drain. Mediocre grades in subjects I found tedious. Quiet at family dinners. Uninterested in the social architecture my mother had constructed in Linden Falls. Indifferent to the college path my father had outlined for me on a spreadsheet the summer before senior year. A spreadsheet that included projected earnings by major, projected social standing by institution, and a column labeled ROI on parental investment that I wish I was inventing. The version that actually existed had been coding since she was 13. I had taught myself Python on a second-hand laptop I bought with babysitting money. By 15, I was building browser extensions and selling them on developer forums under the username SVDEV for prices between $40 and $200 per license. By 17, I had a side income my parents did not know about, a Stripe account in my own name, and a half-formed idea about a software tool for small business inventory management that kept me up most nights sketching logic flows in a notebook I kept under my mattress. My parents did not know about any of it, not because I hid it maliciously, but because they had never asked. My mother once walked past my desk while I was mid-build on an application and said, "You spend too much time on that thing." My father, on the 3 occasions he had glanced at my screen, had said some variation of, "Is that a game?" It wasn't a game. It was the beginning of everything. But in that house, if it didn't look like a Dartmouth application or a country club recommendation, it didn't register. The examples accumulated over the years the way water damages a foundation, slowly, invisibly, until the structure can no longer bear its own weight. When I was 14, I won a regional coding competition organized by a technology nonprofit based in Manchester. First place, a certificate and a $250 prize. I brought the certificate home and set it on the kitchen table. My father glanced at it, said, "What's the practical application of this?" and moved it to the counter so he could set his briefcase down. My mother said, "That's nice, honey. Can you set the table?" The certificate ended up on the refrigerator for 11 days behind a pizza delivery menu. Then it disappeared. When I was 16, I told my father I was thinking about applying to a computer science program at a state university on a scholarship I had researched. He sat back in his chair and said, "Computer science is a saturated field. You need a differentiator, and frankly, your transcript doesn't give you one." He then pulled out the spreadsheet, the one with the ROI column. He walked me through it like a client presentation. At the bottom, in a cell highlighted in yellow, was a projected annual income figure for a female software developer at age 28. He had sourced it from an article. He showed me the article. I did not point out that the article was from 11 years prior. When I was 17, I sold a browser extension to a small e-commerce company for $800, the largest single transaction I had made up to that point. I sat at the dinner table the same evening and tried carefully to describe what I had done. I explained what the extension did. I explained how I had marketed it. I said the amount. My father set down his fork and said, "That's a hobby income, Serena. Don't confuse a hobby with a career." My mother nodded and turned to Preston to ask how his internship applications were going. Preston had not applied to any internships yet. The conversation moved on. I did not bring it up again. And so by the time that manila envelope slid across the kitchen table on a Tuesday night in September, I had spent 5 years building something in silence in a house where silence was the only safe climate for anything I cared about. I was 18. I had a bank account they didn't know about, a notebook full of product specs they'd never seen, and exactly $2,600 in savings from 4 years of selling software on forums and doing remote freelance development work for small businesses. I was not a drain. I was a river they had never looked at. They just saw the water and called it a flood. The 30 days passed more quietly than they expected. I imagine they thought there would be scenes, pleading perhaps. My mother had positioned a box of tissues on the counter the morning after the envelope conversation, and I noticed it was still there a week later, unused, its presence increasingly theatrical. I did not plead. I made a list. I found a room for rent in a house in Concord, New Hampshire, 40 minutes from Linden Falls, shared with 2 graduate students who were never home before 10 at night. The room was $280 a month. The closet was barely large enough for a suitcase. The desk fit exactly 1 laptop and a glass of water. I moved out on a Saturday morning in October. My father stood in the driveway while I loaded 2 bags and a cardboard box into the second-hand Honda I had bought 6 months earlier with freelance earnings. He did not offer to help carry anything. When everything was loaded, he nodded once and said, "This is the right move. You'll be better off working things out on your own." My mother stood at the front window. She did not come outside. I drove away and did not look in the rearview mirror. I had made a decision somewhere between the kitchen table and the moving day, quiet and deliberate. The kind of decision you don't announce because announcing it would only make room for argument. I was going to build the thing in my notebook, and I was going to do it without them. And if it became what I believed it could become, they were never going to see a single dollar of it. That was the moment I stopped being the drain they had named me and started becoming the person I had always been building toward. I just needed more desk space. The room in Concord was small enough that I had to be efficient. I had no room for anything that didn't serve the work. I kept the notebook on the desk. I kept the laptop charged. I worked 3 contract development jobs simultaneously through 2 freelance platforms, billing between $40 and $75 an hour, enough to cover rent, food, and internet, with a small amount left over each month that went directly into a savings account I had labeled, with complete earnestness, company fund. The product I was building was called Stockline. The concept was straightforward and at the time almost entirely unserved at the price point I was targeting. Small retail businesses, boutiques, hardware stores, specialty food shops were running inventory on spreadsheets, on paper, on systems designed for companies 10 times their size that charged subscription fees those businesses couldn't sustain. I wanted to build something lightweight, intuitive, and priced so that a shop with 3 employees and 1 register could afford it without a second thought. I had seen this problem in the wild. The woman who ran the crap supply store where I'd bought my first soldering kit kept her inventory in a spiral notebook. The man who ran the used bookstore 2 blocks from my Concord room tracked his stock in an Excel file so large it crashed his computer every Thursday when he tried to update it. These were not edge cases. These were the entire market. I built the first working version of Stockline over 7 months, working between 11 at night and 2 in the morning after my contract hours were done. I tested it first on the bookstore owner, a man named Arthur Reedy, who was 63 and initially skeptical of anything that required a login. By the end of the 2nd week, he called me at 9 in the morning to say he had just done his first accurate stock count in 4 years and he wanted to know if he could pay me more for it. I told him the rate was $42 a month. He said that was less than he spent on the inkjet cartridges he was replacing every 2 weeks to print inventory reports. He was my first paying customer. I have never forgotten his name. By month 11 in Concord, I had 22 paying customers and $1,200 a month in recurring revenue. I was still working contract jobs. I had not told anyone in my family that the company existed. My mother sent a text on my 19th birthday that read, "Happy birthday. Hope you're finding your footing." I did not respond. Not out of anger. I just genuinely did not have anything to say that would land in the way I needed it to. I was building. I did not need witnesses yet. I needed time. Preston called once, about 4 months after I moved out. He had heard through my mother that I was doing some tech thing. His exact words on the phone were, "So you're like, doing freelance IT stuff? Like fixing people's computers?" I said I was building a software product. He said, "Oh, like an app? Is there money in that?" I said I was working on it. He said, "Cool, cool. Hey, do you know anything about WordPress? My agency's client wants a new site, and I thought maybe you could do it cheap." I said I was too busy. He said, "No worries, I'll find someone on Upwork." That was the last time Preston called me for 2 years. By the time I was 21, Stockline had 147 paying subscribers. I had hired my first contractor, a developer named Miriam Chin, who I found through a developer community forum and who worked remotely from Portland, Oregon. I was still living in Concord, still in the same room, though I had upgraded the desk. The company fund had grown to $18,000. I had not taken outside investment. I had not told my parents about any of it. By the time I was 23, Stockline had 612 subscribers, a small but deeply loyal user base, and a net promoter score that made the investors who eventually found us visibly emotional at pitch meetings. A venture capital firm called Meridian Growth Partners reached out through a mutual contact in the developer community. Their associate sent an email on a Wednesday morning that I read 3 times before I called Miriam and read it to her aloud. They wanted to schedule a call. The call led to a meeting. The meeting led to a term sheet. I signed a Series A agreement on the last day of February, 2 weeks before my 24th birthday. $2.1 million. 8% equity. The valuation implied by that math was something I wrote in my notebook, circled once, and then closed the cover over. I want to pause here for a moment because I know some of you watching right now have had a version of this experience. Not the exact details, maybe, But the feeling of building something quietly, alone, in a small room, while the people who were supposed to believe in you were elsewhere doing something that mattered more to them than you did. If that is you, I want you to know that the room doesn't have to be big. It just has to have a desk. Drop a comment below and tell me what you're building. And if this story is hitting something real for you, please subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Now, back to the story. The 2.1 million changed the physics of everything. I moved the company to a proper office in Manchester, New Hampshire, 720 square feet on the third floor of a converted mill building, the kind of space with exposed brick and original hardwood floors that makes new hires feel like they're part of something with history. I hired 4 full-time employees. Miriam became the head of engineering. I hired a head of sales, a product designer, and an office manager named Grace, who kept the operation running with a level of calm precision I aspired to personally. We onboarded clients at a rate that required me to reconfigure our server architecture twice in the first 6 months post-funding. My parents did not know. I had not told them about the Series A. I had not told them about the revenue. I had not even told them about Miriam or Grace or the mill building office, or the fact that I was signing lease agreements and employment contracts and client invoices with my own signature on behalf of a company that was beginning to become something real. I was 24 years old, and I was the founder and CEO of a software company that was growing at a rate that made my investors nervous in the best possible way, and not one person in the house on Birchwood Drive had the faintest idea. This was not strategic silence in those early years. It was simpler than that. They had not asked. My father had not called to say, "How is the tech thing going?" My mother had not texted to check in on the software product she had once walked past without looking at. Preston had not circled back from his Upwork comment. They simply had no information because they had made no inquiry, and I had no interest in offering a progress report to people who had calculated my value in a spreadsheet and found me wanting. The silence became strategic later. Specifically, it became strategic on a Thursday evening in November when I was 26 years old, and I received a call from my cousin Adele, who was one of the few members of my extended family I still spoke with. Adele told me that at a recent family dinner, my father had told her husband, a man named Frank who worked in commercial real estate, that his daughter was doing some kind of small software thing up in Manchester. She said Frank had asked follow-up questions, and my father had said, "I don't really know the details. She's always been the independent type. We just hope she's stable." Stable. He hoped I was stable. I had $2.1 million in the bank, 43 employees, and a product that was actively used by over 4,000 small businesses in 11 states. And my father hoped I was stable. I sat with that phone call for the rest of the evening. Then I made a decision that would matter more than I understood at the time. I called my attorney, a woman named Rachel Park who had handled our Series A paperwork, and I asked her to review every clause in our shareholder agreement related to founder equity, family claims, and any inheritance provisions that might, under New Hampshire law, create any pathway for a family member to assert an interest in a privately held company. She spent 2 days reviewing everything and called me back to say the structure was clean. My equity was held entirely within a trust I had established at 22 on the advice of an accountant I had hired independently. The trust was ironclad. No one was getting anywhere near it without my explicit, documented consent. I remember the exact moment I knew the silence was about to end, and I had nothing to do with breaking it. It was a Monday morning in March, and I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of a building in Boston. I was there to finalize the terms of a partnership agreement with a logistics software company called Grid Pulse Systems, whose platform served mid-size retail chains across the Northeast. The partnership would embed Stockline's inventory tools directly into Grid Pulse's interface, giving us access to their entire client base in one stroke. The deal had been in negotiation for 4 months. It was the largest commercial agreement in Stockline's history. The GridPulse CEO, a man named Thomas Bauer, had brought 3 of his executives to the signing. I had brought Rachel Park and our head of sales. We signed the documents, shook hands, and a GridPulse communications associate took photographs for a press release they planned to issue the following week. Before I left, Thomas said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "You know what impresses me most about you, Serena? You built this entire thing without making any noise. Most founders need everyone to know. You just needed it to work." I thanked him. I drove back to Manchester. I did not check my phone until I was parked outside the office. The GridPulse partnership announcement ran the following Wednesday. A technology trade publication called Tech Sector Northeast ran a profile alongside it, the kind that takes the embedded photo from the press release and pairs it with a sidebar about the company's history, its funding rounds, its founder. The sidebar mentioned the Series A. It mentioned the current customer count, which by that time had crossed 11,000. It mentioned my age. It mentioned Linden Falls, New Hampshire as my hometown. I know it was this profile that reached my father because the timeline is exact. The profile published on a Wednesday. My father called on a Friday at 9:17 in the morning. I saw his name on my phone screen and sat very still for the length of 3 rings. Then I answered, "Serena." His voice had a quality I had not heard from him before. Something careful, almost gentle, like a man who has rehearsed the first sentence and is uncertain about the second. "I saw something in a newsletter about your company." "Yes?" "They said it was valued at," the number they cited was, he stopped, started again. "Is that accurate?" I said it was in the right range. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, "Your mother and I had no idea the scope of what you were doing." I said that was true. Another pause. Then, with a warmth that felt retrieved from storage rather than naturally present, he said, "We're very proud of you, Serena. Really, this is remarkable." I said, "Thank you." I said I had a 10 o'clock meeting. I said I would call him back when I had more time. I hung up. I sat at my desk and looked at the morning light on the brick wall opposite my window. I felt nothing in particular. That, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know about where things stood. The calls came with increasing frequency over the following months. My mother called 4 days after my father. Her opening line was, "I always knew you were meant for something big." I had heard that sentence before from another parent in another story, and I noted with something like dark humor how reliable a sentence it was, how cleanly it erased everything that came before it, how confidently it rewrote history in the speaker's favor. I was warm but brief. I had work to do. Preston called in April. His voice had the particular quality of a man performing casualness over a framework of calculation. "Hey, sis. So you're like actually killing it out there, huh? That's awesome. That's genuinely awesome." He asked about the company. He asked about the team size. He asked with a carefully offhanded delivery whether I was looking for marketing talent because he had been thinking about making a move from his current agency. I said we had a strong marketing team. He said, Right, cool. Well, hey, if anything opens up." I said I would keep that in mind. I would not keep that in mind. Then came the Sunday dinner invitation. My mother left a voicemail in June, formal and bright, the voice she used for church committee calls. "Your father and I would love for you to come down to Linden Falls. We're having a small family gathering. Preston will be there, and Aunt Dorothy and the Kimbers from next door. We just want to see you. It's been too long." It had been 3 years since I had been to that house. I did not call back immediately. I called Rachel Park first and described the pattern of contact over the previous months, the escalating warmth, the proximity to the GridPulse announcement, the cumulative timing. She listened to all of it and said, "Just be thoughtful about what you agree to in any informal setting. Don't sign anything. Don't make verbal commitments. If anyone asks you about the company in a way that feels like they're establishing a basis for something, take notes afterward." I said I understood. Then I called my mother back and said I could come the following Sunday for a few hours. I would not be staying overnight. The house on Birchwood Drive was unchanged, except that the mailbox had been repainted. The driveway held my parents' cars, Preston's car, and Aunt Dorothy's sedan. The Kimbers arrived just after I did, which meant there were exactly 11 people in the house, including me. The dining room table had been extended with the leaf panel I remembered from every Christmas of my childhood. My mother had made a roast. There were good cloth napkins. I noticed the change in the room's atmosphere the moment I walked in, a quality of attention directed at me that had never existed in that house before. Aunt Dorothy called me our little entrepreneur and squeezed both my hands. Mr. Preneur, Kimber asked me twice about the valuation figure from the profile, and each time I gave him a non-answer, he nodded as though I had confirmed something. My mother touched my arm more in 2 hours than she had in the 5 years preceding my departure. My father sat at the head of the table and listened more than he spoke, which was itself a reversal of every dinner of my childhood. After the main course, during the gap between plates and dessert that always signals the real purpose of a gathering, my father set both palms flat on the tablecloth and looked at me. The room went slightly quieter. 11 people, an extended leaf table, a roast that had been excellent. My father said, "We've been thinking, your mother and I, about the early years, the sacrifices we made." He paused. "We put a lot into raising you, Serena, and we're not asking for anything formal. We just think it would be meaningful if, as the company continues to grow, the family felt some connection to that success, a kind of acknowledgement of what went into building you." He said building you the way my father always said important things, precisely, without apology, as though the phrasing itself closed debate. Preston, across the table, nodded once. My mother's hands were folded in her lap. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I set my napkin carefully on the table beside my plate, and I looked at my father for a long moment. Then I said, "I think that's something I'd want to discuss in a more formal setting. My attorney manages anything related to company equity or financial matters. I'll have her reach out." My father blinked. He had not expected the word attorney. He had expected warmth, gratitude, perhaps. He had expected the dinner to be the foundation for something he could build on. My mother cleared her throat and said, Of course. We just wanted to plant the seed." I helped carry plates to the kitchen. I left at 7:41 in the evening, which I noted because 7:42 had been the microwave clock the night of the manila envelope, and 1 minute's difference felt like symmetry. I drove back to Manchester and called Rachel Park from the parking garage. I told her everything, word for word. She said, "Get ready." She was right. The formal letter arrived 3 months later. Not from my parents directly. From an attorney named Gerald Prentice at a firm called Ashbrook Family Law in Concord. The letter stated that Douglas Foss and Constance Foss were prepared to file suit in Hillsborough County Superior Court on the basis that the intellectual and personal development they had provided during Serena Voss's minor years constituted a material investment in her subsequent professional success, and that as such, they were entitled to equitable compensation representing a percentage of the company's current valuation, estimated in the letter at $50 million. They were claiming 7.5%, $3.75 million. The letter included a phrase that I have committed to memory because it is genuinely one of the most extraordinary sentences I have ever read in a legal document. The formative environment provided by the Voss household was foundational to the development of Ms. Aund Voss's professional capabilities. The formative environment. The formative environment was a kitchen table, a manila envelope, and a spreadsheet with an ROI column. That was the formative environment. I read the letter twice, sitting in my office at 7:15 in the morning with the first coffee of the day. Then I called Rachel Park and laughed. A genuine full laugh, the kind that takes you by surprise. Rachel had asked me on the phone if I needed a glass of water. I told her I did not. I told her we were going to court. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in October at Hillsborough County Superior Court in Manchester. I had requested through Rachel that the proceedings be scheduled in the morning session. I arrived at 8:55 in a charcoal suit I had bought for the grid poll signing. Rachel was beside me with a document folder that contained, among other things, the deed transfer history of the Birchwood Drive house, the tuition records for Preston's Dartmouth education, a certified copy of the trust agreement that held my company equity, the original shareholder agreement from the Series A, and a printed timeline that documented, month by month, the trajectory of Stockline's growth from first customer to current valuation. Every data point sourced, stamped, and dated. Nothing in that folder was guesswork. Everything was fact. My parents arrived with Gerald Prentice at 9:03. My mother was wearing a blazer I recognized from her decorating client presentations. My father had the expression of a man who had done the math and still believed the numbers would resolve in his favor. Preston was not present. I noted that with interest. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. Gerald Prentice opened with a statement that lasted 11 minutes and which centered on the concept of parental investment, the provision of housing and nutrition and social stability during Serena Voss's developmental years, and the argument that without the foundational security of the Voss household, the company that bore her name would not exist. He used the phrase formative environment 4 times. The judge, the Honorable Sandra Okafor, took notes without visible expression. Rachel Park stood when it was our turn. She is 5'4" and speaks with the quiet authority of someone who has never needed volume to be heard. She said, "Your Honor, the plaintiff's claim rests on the premise that the defendant's professional success is attributable to the environment her parents provided. We would like to walk the court through that environment in some detail." She opened the folder. She walked, calmly and methodically, through the timeline. She presented the certificate from the Manchester coding competition that had gone from kitchen table to behind a pizza menu. She presented the evidence of the browser extension sales from my teenage years, fully documented through Stripe records. She presented the freelance income records from my 18th year, demonstrating that I had been self-sustaining well before the manila envelope. She presented the letter my father had written on First Harbor Bank notepad paper, which I had kept for 13 years in a manila envelope of my own, the one that had arrived in the mail 30 days after I left. She read it into the record. "The law doesn't require us to house you anymore. We've done our part." My mother made a sound in her throat. My father looked at the table in front of him. Rachel then presented the trust agreement, the shareholder history, and a timeline demonstrating that every dollar used to build Stockline had been earned, saved, and invested by Serena Voss beginning at the age of 13, with zero financial contribution from Douglas or Constance Voss at any stage. She called one witness, Arthur Reedy, the bookstore owner, now 67, who traveled from Concord to testify that the young woman who had built his inventory system had been doing so, quote, out of a room the size of a closet on her own time with her own money and her own idea. He said this last part with the particular emphasis of a man who has nothing to gain and everything to give. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Okafor asked my father 2 questions directly. The first, had he ever financially contributed to the development or operations of Stockline in any form? He said no. The second, had he been aware, prior to the tech sector Northeast profile, that his daughter was operating a software company? He paused for a long time and then said, "We knew she was doing something in tech." Judge Okafor wrote something on her notepad. The room held its breath. The ruling came in 4 days. The suit was dismissed in its entirety. Judge Okafor's written opinion included the following sentence, which Rachel read to me over the phone and which I wrote in my notebook the same way I had once written the Series A valuation, circled once, cover closed. The court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim. The defendant's success is the product of her own labor, capital, and intellectual development, entirely independent of any contribution by the plaintiffs. And equity theory does not support recovery for the ordinary provision of housing and sustenance during a minor's childhood. The ordinary provision, that was the whole of it. 13 years reduced to the ordinary provision. I did not celebrate. I went back to the office. Grace had left a coffee on my desk. Miriam sent a single text that said, "Well, And I replied with the word dismissed, and she sent back a gif of a woman calmly flipping a table that I have saved to my camera roll. I ordered dinner for the team that evening from the Italian place on Elm Street, and we ate in the conference room and talked about the quarters numbers, and nobody mentioned the courthouse once. Because they had all been carefully professional about it, and I loved them for that. My parents did not call after the ruling. They did not write. Prentice sent a brief note through Rachel's office indicating that his clients would not be pursuing further legal action. It was one paragraph. I did not respond. There was nothing left to say that the judge had not already said more precisely than I could have. Preston sent me a text 6 weeks after the hearing. It said, "Hey, I'm sorry about all that. For what it's worth, I didn't know they were going to do it." I read it twice. I typed and deleted 3 different responses. Eventually, I wrote back, "I appreciate you saying that." I did not say anything else. That felt like the right amount. The person I want to speak to directly, before I finish this, is the one who recognized something in the opening minute of this video. The one who has been handed an envelope or a spreadsheet or a look across a dinner table that communicated, without any room for misinterpretation, that they were the budget line, that they were the drain, that their value was calculated and found insufficient, and the math had already been run and the decision had already been made. I want you to hear this, because I needed to hear it at 18 and there was no one there to say it. The people who failed to see you are not the authority on what you are. They are the authority on what they were willing to look at. Those are different things. Build in the small room. Keep the notebook. Charge the laptop. The room gets bigger. I am 31 years old. Stockline serves 42,000 small businesses across 26 states and is currently valued at just over $50 million. I have 28 full-time employees. Arthur Reedy's bookstore now has the best functioning inventory system of any used bookstore I have ever visited, and he sends me a card every December with a chocolate milkshake drawn on the front, because he remembers the detail I told him once about my grandfather's gas station Fridays, and he is that kind of person. Rachel Park is still my attorney. Miriam Chen is still my head of engineering and has turned down 3 acquisition offers on my behalf with a speed and precision that brings me genuine joy every time. Grace manages the office with the same calm I continue to aspire to. The house on Birchwood Drive sold last year. I know this because Adele mentioned it on the phone in passing. My parents are in a smaller place now. I have no feelings about that in any direction. I did not send flowers and I did not send the letter. I sent nothing because silence, I have learned, is not always a wound. Sometimes it is simply the correct answer to a question that was never asked in good faith. If you have built something, or if you are in the middle of building something, or if you are still in the small room with the notebook and the charged laptop and you have not started yet, but you know what the thing is, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what you're building or what you wish someone had told you when you were starting. That is the comment section I want to read tonight. And if the story found you at a moment when you needed it, subscribe, because we are here every day and there is always another story that deserves to be told.